So a few years ago, I experienced any app developer and game developer's wet dream, reaching the top of the US charts on mobile with both FunRun 1 and FunRun 2. We were doing this as the first company to really introduce synchronous multiplayer experience on mobile. And it was through the Mario Kart experience that we were able to reach the masses. FunRun is a cute game that lure you in, believing it will remain cute, but there's actually a lot of blood and gore. But the true essence to it is that you're playing with your friends. It didn't start off as a true success. It was pretty lonely at first. Not a lot of people were playing. But through learning from player feedback and constantly iterating and updating the game, soon the masses started to pour in. The real inflection point came when we had a Twitter competition where we asked you to tweet about FunRun for a chance to win in-game currency. And with that, it soon took off across especially US high schools, and you would see this in any cafeteria.
Oh, yes! Yes! Oh, yes! Oh,
This was great engagement, and today the FunRun games have reached over 100 million downloads, and it's all organic. To replicate a success like FunRun today is going to be really hard. There's three primary reasons this took off. The first being that it's a unique type of a gaming experience, and it's also very heavily designed so that you get a good onboarding experience. There's not a lot of friction. And thirdly, the app market back then wasn't as saturated. I have no idea what happened. All right. So today, I'm going to talk about what you can do to remain ahead of the curve, given that the market conditions have changed. Together with one of the FunRun founders, we stepped out of the company to really dig deep into how we can actually boost virality with the market changing. And talking about change, if anyone wants the slides, please ask me after the presentation. But when it comes down to growth, you really need to go back to basics, because if you're only relying on user acquisition and your game in itself is just bleeding money or bleeding users, it's going to look like a bucket like this. And ads isn't the solution for all games, but it can give you a huge amount of users, but if they're not retained well, they will disappear. So it really comes down to the first-time user experience. In the first-time user experience, you don't really need to think about growth until this is actually solved for your game. And this is super important because 80% on average of players open an app, installs an app, and then they leave it. So what are you going to do to make sure that in that first session, they understand, yes, I am going to return to this game. So anywhere where there's friction in your onboarding flow and in that first-time user experience, you give them the reason to not come back. And one of my big pet peeves is really this one. I don't know how many of you have a game where you actually ask your players as the first thing you do to opt into push notifications, but we can just survey the room and see how many actually accept these when this is the first thing you see. Sometimes. Good answer is actually sometimes, because I talked to an expert on this, and he said if you have a good and strong brand, like Angry Birds do have that, the likelihood of people opting in at this stage is very high. But if you're a very unknown player, they're not going to opt in because they anticipate that you're going to spam them. But this also varies a lot from game to game, so this is something you should definitely test out. But anything adds friction. Another example is, have anyone played Super Mario Run? Some? Do you remember this?
Okay, In what amount of time?
Wow. Anyone remembering how many minutes it took for you to actually get to where you started to play? 6 minutes. You must really want to play Super Mario Run for sticking around that long before you actually get to play the game. They must have forgotten something because the original game was 0 minutes. So all of these things add up to friction, and with Fun Run we actually tested, do we have a tutorial or not? And retention was actually higher without a tutorial. But again, these things are invisible and it should be tested, so you figure out what works for your audience. But basically, when you're building out your games, you should think about it as something that a toddler could play with as well as your grandma. Like, it should be super simple, and you should think of your players as someone that should not need any guiding. It should be super clear what they have to do next. So before even getting into growth, remove any friction points that you have from the first-time user experience so that they can actually go on and enjoy your game. They came there to play it, so let them. Next one is word of mouth, because when it really comes down to it, you want your players to talk about you. And whenever you introduce emotions in your games, either they're really positive or really bad, like a bad experience, that's when you have a trigger for people to start talking. I think a good example of a game that drives a lot of word of mouth is Space Team. Have anyone played it? You guys are missing out. You should definitely try it. In Space Team, you're collaborating. We used it a lot in our team for just playing together. Here's an example.
Activate Sigma spout.
Set meter.
Activate
Pick up
Everybody shut up.
Oh my God! Activate solar fan.
Solar fan. Solar fan.
This is a very engaging game, and I think key here is collaboration, but you need to bring in your friends to have fun and play with it. So it has a natural word of mouth leverage to it. Another one is that when you're playing a game, with Fun Run we saw a lot of people screenshotting the game when they told other people about it. And it's because an image is actually saying more than 1,000 words. So you would have to spend a lot of time conveying what the game is about. And a good example of this is also Cross Your Road, where you have high emotions when you're dying in the game, and they're presenting you with that snapshot of how that death scene looked like. It was a great virality factor for them. But, oh no, we have to figure something out. Who are you guys? Oh, it doesn't work. Basically, who here says a GIF? A few. And who here says GIF? All right, GIF it is. Need to please the crowd. So a GIF says more than 50 images, or however many frames you want to use. And in a game, when you have a good experience, having animations to it is going to explain so much more about what's happening. In Fun Run, it was living out traps, and you could see how it actually pulled your opponents away from the finish line. In Cats, you actually record this session. This game by Septilab, and when you win, you can share the replay right after. A game that does this even better is Steppy Pants, because the best time to actually trigger players to do anything in your advantage is when they've had a good and positive experience. That's when you should prompt them for giving you a rating. It's when you want to prompt them to share, to purchase, anything. So what they do is that they'll actually leverage sharing only when, or they only prompt you to share when you hit a new high score. And all in all, I'm of the impression that sharing is broken, because usually in games you're seeing these slapped on Facebook and Twitter buttons. When you ask companies why they have them there, they usually don't have a good answer apart from, well, I saw this other company having them there. And it's not really giving you a good reason to do so. But what we actually see from data, and you can probably think about this for yourself, we're not really sharing to social media anymore. On social media, you have so many friends that you're not playing with. They might not be interested in the same things as you are. But where you can tap into a friend base that does like the same thing as you is in private channels, private messaging channels. And so what we're seeing is that if you're allowing your players to share to whatever channel they want, they're choosing messaging. So you can optimize for that. And surprisingly enough, the second one is email. And then Facebook and Twitter comes. So there's a really dominating shift in the industry, going from players sharing to private channels over social channels. And when you're prompting your players to do this sort of word of mouth, you want to make it easy for them. And another way to do that is to actually look at how do they talk about my game. Because you can introduce a predefined text on most channels that you trigger. And having texts like, oh, I just reached level X, or come beat my score, it's not very compelling. It looks like an advertisement ad. So what we did was that we actually went on Twitter and we looked at what our players were already writing, and we just adapted that language, because it didn't come natural to us to say having a blast, or all of those guys just got washed, get on my level, son, want to catch an L, and I just beat a golden fox. And these were all triggered by events in the game. And the reason for doing so was also because it created some triggering effect from them too, because we introduced a new text every time they clicked a button. So it was like a reward for them to see, oh, what did the team come up with now? And this is all part of making things easier. So my second tip for you is to make sharing emotionless. Make sharing emotion simple and frictionless. And next part is virality. How do you really boost this even further? And there's a real difference to going viral versus virality. Anything has an element of virality. You can think of it as the K factor is 1 if any player that starts playing your game invites another player to start playing a game. You're going viral if and getting this hockey stick whenever the K factor increases from 1. So if any player introduces more than one player to your game. But what is more normal is that there's less players that are being introduced to the game. And for those, in this example, only every 5th player is bringing another player in, so the K factor is 0.2. But the primary example of an app going viral is definitely Uber. Like Uber really used this system, and it's called referrals. And what they did there was that they incentivized you to get your friends to start using the platform, and they would give you rides for free in exchange to it. And boosting this is something we've seen across apps in general, but we haven't really seen it in mobile games. Why? I don't really know, but there's an untapped potential there. A game that does this quite well, and it's one of the few examples, is HQ Trivia. I don't know if you play this, but it's pretty core to the game that you want extra lives to be able to answer questions that you don't know the answer to. And their flow is that you click invite and you get your referral code. You can share this and choose whatever channel you want to share it to, and your friend then adds it to their game. What Mara Run is doing, however, not incentivize is that you can share the referral codes via messaging and email. And what happens is that you get the link, you get some text, and you go to you open the App Store, and you have to then send another friend request in the game. One thing that I think they could do better here is to actually adding more visuals to it so that the recipients actually know more about what the game is about. And when you click the link and you take it to the App Store, unfortunately you can't really skip that step. You're actually automatically added as friends. Like that would be a much better experience. And if you're already friends in a game, then you should just skip that. Or if you already have the game installed, you should just skip the step about going to the store and use universal linking to go straight, become friends right away. So leveraging referrals is something I hope to see more of in games going forward. And yeah, so to summarize, find ways to move your friction from your onboarding and first-time user experience. Remember why your users are downloading your game and give them a way to actually experience that, experience your game sooner than later. Make sharing emotions as simple and frictionless as possible, because when you make it easy for them, at least what we saw was that we really boosted our growth with that. And leveraging referrals if you can. So yeah, that's it. I hope these tips can help you on the way to get the same type of demand as discounted products get on Black Friday. Thank you very much. If you want the slides, please email me, and happy to answer any questions that you might have. Any questions? Great. Oh.
One question. You said you got to 100 million downloads all organically. I agree, if you can get it organically with viral traffic, that's awesome, but why not also kind of use paid acquisitions to kind of
yeah, good question. So we never monetized well enough to do any paid user acquisition. So we were forced to figuring out how we can grow there through our existing users. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.